Welcome to Mo's Market Pulse. I'm your host, Sara Mokaram, founder of Mo Digital Solutions, where we help businesses hit their revenue goals and thrive. On this podcast, we talk with industry leaders about their business, market trends, growth strategies, and what's ahead. Today, I have Danielle Steed, Head of Operations at ScreenSteps. Thank you so much for taking time today and joining us today, Danielle.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
To get us started, I just want to unpack a bit about your background and the heart of the business that you help lead. Can you walk us through the company's origin story, what problem they're trying to solve?
Absolutely. So I've been in the tech industry for about a decade and I love technology. I worked in AWS consulting for an AWS consulting firm, and that's where I first got my taste with AI and all the amazing things that are able to happen. And so recently I joined ScreenSteps, and it's a little over 20 years old. It actually started out as a business that wasn't using AI, and now it's developed into this amazing product that is able to use all of the advancing AI technologies to help us really serve the companies that we work with. And to tell you a little bit about ScreenSteps, the problem that we help companies solve is when an employee asks a manager, "How do I do something?" they are requiring their manager or their team to really halt what they're doing and answer that question. And so we use both a framework and a technology, both hand in hand, to really eliminate employees having to ask their manager, "How do I do something?" And so a lot of businesses we find operate on what's called tribal knowledge or industry knowledge. So you have to be able to, rather than people relying on memory or memorization, we use our framework, which is how do we help people find and follow information? And then the technology of being able to have a Google-like search that people can find information really quickly and empower employees to not have to ask their managers so many questions and just really be independent.
Great. And so, how do you get the knowledge into ScreenSteps? If someone were using it, do they have to, put in procedures or any documents, and then it's essentially looking up the information that's being inputted into the system?
Yeah, really great question. So in traditional, businesses, a lot of times those SOPs or documentation is stored in something like a SharePoint. But if you're like me working at other businesses, it gets lost in there. People don't know where to find it. They're not sure what the path is to that documentation. And if there is an SOP that's created, a lot of times it's created in a way that's very long and hard for someone to be able to find. And so what we do is we do take existing documentation that a business might have and we run it through our AI models. And instead of it just transcribing it, it actually creates a critical path. So it breaks out what we call foundational knowledge and actionable knowledge. And so foundational knowledge is like, I'll use the example of Salesforce since a lot of people understand that. If you were trying to teach someone the foundational knowledge about Salesforce, it's like Salesforce is a CRM, or it's something, when do we use Salesforce? How do we use Salesforce? That's foundational. But then actionable is, how do I create a contact in Salesforce? Those are two different. And so one is we can take existing documentation, we can actually put it into our AI models, and it not only transcribes it, but it creates a critical path. And then it creates like a GPS guide that someone can find and follow when they're in front of a customer or doing a really complex task or something like that. Another way is we use AI models in order to get information out of people's heads, because all of us know that within businesses, there's people that have been there for a very long time. They have a lot of tribal knowledge, or there's things that have not been documented. And most businesses that we work with, we find that they have 50% or less documented. If you ask them, they're like, "We have a ton documented." But if you ask them how to do very specific tasks, it's like, "Oh, go ask Susie over there. She'll know how." And so what we do is we interview key stakeholders or those that have that knowledge in their heads. We interview them using AI. And again, it takes that transcript and it creates a critical path that then is created into a GPS. And those GPS like guides, they have things like checklists, decision trees. They have images that people can quickly scan. And so that's what really flows into our find and follow framework. Can an employee find it in 5 seconds or less? Can they follow it without a manager's help? And then are they able to really serve whoever they're working with very quickly?
That's amazing. I love that you can just do an interview and then have that implement implemented into the system without having to write out long, tedious procedures.
Yeah, absolutely. And we find that, like, for example, some of the customers we've worked with, they had a goal within the first like 30 days. They wanted to have over 100 documents created. And they were able to do that within the first week, just using the AI tools. Obviously, it just expedites everything. It makes it much more efficient. But then in light of that, it also, then if you turn it into a way that people can find and follow, then it makes them more efficient too. So it's an efficient way of capturing the knowledge, and then it's an efficient way of transferring the knowledge. Instead of doing like things like in traditional schooling, it's like you're going to sit, you're going to listen to a teacher, but we're actually kind of going against that methodology. Instead of asking people to memorize a lot, we say that if you memorize a lot, you forget a lot. And so it's like, instead of relying on memorization, you just have people follow the guides. They don't need to memorize maps. They just follow GPSs.
And so, as head of operations, what does your day to day look like and what are you responsible for?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I love working at ScreenSteps. In my role as head of operations, I do a lot of different things. I work with our overall of our compliance frameworks and help with those type of items. I do a lot of HR tasks, so I help with some of those things, like just tasks that are based around operations. And then let's see what else I do. I do a lot of making sure that we are operationalizing the way that we work. So we're becoming really efficient. So we actually use ScreenSteps ourselves internally. And so I'm creating guides for our teammates to follow, and then following up on making sure that we're all working in tandem, that we're all working in a systematic way.
Great. And so I noticed that ScreenSteps, as you mentioned, has been around for a couple decades now and was really bootstrapping for the first 2 decades and then took external funding. I believe it was end of 2023.
Mhm.
What made this the right moment? And how does that change, if anything, the strategic lens kind of moving forwards?
Yeah, I would say the main thing is we just see ourselves as having a really, really exciting future. I think all of our technology developments over the last few years and some of the niches that we've found that we work really well in have made this a perfect time. We have big goals as a company to really grow and develop and just better serve our customers. And so I think it was just the right time. The technology that we're developing is changing every day, and it's changing the way people are working. And with the advancements of AI, as you all know, it's amazing to see how it's developing over time, and being able to change even how we iterate on our product itself. So ScreenStep itself is getting better and better, just as AI models get better and better. And so I think that was a big reason for some of the strategic moves we've made.
That makes sense. So now that we understand a little bit about ScreenSteps and how it works, I just want to zoom out a bit and explore how you're navigating kind of the broader landscape and shifts within the industry. So the knowledge management and training tech space has definitely exploded with the AI integrations right now. So, where do you see the most significant gaps that others aren't addressing, and how is ScreenSteps uniquely stepping in?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the first thing I'd say is really think the areas where ScreenStep excels, where maybe other people have different approaches, is really in our framework. So just the idea that we don't want people to memorize things is fundamentally different. If you were to take any training, most people want people to memorize things. There's some element of memorization, and we always say we're a zero memorization platform. Because when people memorize things, it's like a pre-flight checklist. If it's interesting, like, yeah, pilots probably could fly an airplane without going through checks, but when they do that, they could miss fundamental steps. And so that's really one of the areas where I think we're much different. I think the other thing is, a lot of times with AI tools, it's kind of like a junk drawer approach. They want to throw all of their information in to and have it just like sort through a junk drawer of information. But our approach is different. We don't want it to just sort through a junk drawer of information. We want to be very intentional about the way the information is input and the way it's designed so that people can actually use it. Because AI is kind of like, if you were to give it a personality, it's one of those people that never thinks they're wrong. And so it will come up with an answer. It will invent an answer. Part of our strategy is all of our information is also checked by another person. So if you have a stakeholder at a business you're working with, yeah, we use the AI tools to create the information, but ultimately that's not the end of it. The key stakeholders checking that information, and then the employees that are using it are also able to iterate. So if there's a step that's wrong, they can comment on there or say like, this needs to be changed. And another fundamental difference is a lot of times there's a bottleneck in authoring. So people will say like, we need to have someone at the top authoring all this and then passing it down. And we actually take a different approach. We think that everyone should author. Yes, there should be permissions on what is published, but everyone has different ways in which they do things. And so if you have different authors coming in and creating guides, it's actually extremely beneficial. And what we call that is knowledge investing versus knowledge spending. So instead of like, if you were my manager and I kept asking you this question and then another team member asked you this question, rather than you answering it to both of us, you would do knowledge investing. You would quickly create a guide in the same amount that it would take you to Slack an answer to me. And then I'm able to, then we have that answer in a repository that anyone can use.
I
So
love that. Yeah, that's great. And who do you view as your closest competitors right now? And what have you learned from watching them win or lose in this space?
Good question. The main thing, and you're going to maybe smile a bit about this answer, I would say our main competitor is actually those that use SharePoint. And I'll tell you why. Because SharePoint is something that pretty much every company uses. And while we're not saying you should never use SharePoint, things get lost in SharePoint and it becomes something where if they can't find it quickly in SharePoint, they rely on tribal knowledge. They turn to a neighbor. They ask someone to fix the problem. And so right now, we're really kind of unique in the space of, we call ourselves an operational knowledge base, an operational knowledge management system. And so when we're talking about that, that's a new term. And so we kind of see ourselves as not having clear, we have some competitors, a lot of people that do like screen capture or something that just transcribes things. But I think where we see the inherent difference is both our methodology and our framework together. And then just really trying to get people to switch over from just using SharePoint.
Great. And so have any industry shifts, tech trends or regulatory changes or even economic shifts forced you to rethink how you deliver or position your product?
I think we're reevaluating. I think any good business owner is constantly reevaluating like the way that we approach the market. The one thing that we've found is really working with businesses that have complexity and change. If you have a business that has not very much change, they can use memorization because they're only having to learn one thing. But when you have businesses like healthcare, the financial industry, things like that, where there's a lot of regulatory components that are changed down or things that they have to follow, processes and procedures, then that's really where ScreenSteps shines because that's an area where they have to rely on getting correct information out to employees in a way that's efficient. And so a lot of times the way people do that is in the old way of thinking, if they weren't to use ScreenSteps, it's like, we're going to have people sit on a training. Well, if someone's out of the office or they're on maternity leave or whatever it may be, they're going to miss that. And so how do you then get that across the board in a systematic way? And so ScreenStep changes that through notifications and different things, some Chrome extensions that people can pull up, things of that matter. But any business with complexity and change is really who the industries that we seek to work with. But in financial institutions, healthcare, they're having lots of policies and procedures constantly changing. And so using ScreenSteps really actually helps us go to market better because we can account for that.
Okay. And so now that we've talked a little bit about the broader market, I want to dive into growth. And I'd love to hear what's working, what hasn't worked that you guys have tried. So, what have been the most effective growth channels for ScreenSteps so far? And are there any surprising ones that outperformed really your guys' expectations?
Yeah, great question. So I have found great success in partnerships. I, first of all, just as an individual and person, I love working in partnerships because I love other businesses. There's something about business that just always has been super interesting to me. And so I personally love that about my job is that I get to work with other businesses, but partnerships have been key, but you have to, when you're thinking about partnerships, you have to find businesses where it's a close enough alignment that it makes it an easy fit for it to be mutually beneficial. And so if you don't find something where it's mutually beneficial or that you have the same goals, then they don't work very well. But I would say that's been one of our key growth metrics, has been working in partnerships and really helping other businesses while also finding a mutually beneficial relationship.
Great. And I know that you mentioned that you serve industries like healthcare or credit unions and banks in the financial sector. How do you think about segmenting for those different industries? Do you have to position differently across those audiences?
Yeah. So fundamentally, the problem that ScreenSteps is solving is the same, right? Employees have a question, which is an input. They need a result that they can then share with their clients. So ScreenSteps, the industries that I would say, if I were to kind of talk about ones that we really work with, we work, like I said, credit unions and banks, any financial institution or fintech. That's a great use of ScreenSteps. We also work a lot with call centers because, as you imagine, if you're sitting in a call center, someone calls in and they have a question. A lot of those easier questions are being answered by AI, but the more complex is actually being passed on to our human agents. And so we work a lot with call centers. There's a great fit for that. And then, we work with universities, like I said, healthcares or scheduling, individual people that are scheduling appointments. We work in that. And then, there's other things like insurance or law firms. Law firms are actually another one of our industries. So to answer your question, yes, each of them have the fundamental thing, which is how do we transfer knowledge to employees to get them to better serve customers, right? But the approach in which they do that is different. Like banks and credit unions look at it differently than from each other, but then from other industries. And so I think we really have to nail down the messaging of what speaks to them. What are they trying to accomplish? And so when you're talking to a financial industry versus a healthcare, you have to really, really understand what they're trying to solve in order to really speak to them. I think that's the gist of it.
Mm-hmm. And so when you think about scaling up customer acquisition, say over the next 12 months, what would you say the number one bottleneck you're trying to solve for first?
Yeah, great thought. I would say, one of the things that we're doing is helping people understand that they have this problem because we're using language that we're kind of coining. Knowledge operations is a new term. I would assume that you probably hadn't heard that before ScreenSteps. And so I think really one of the things that we're focusing on is helping people. Like when we explain the problem, like when I get, 15 minutes to explain it, most people are like, I understand that. That makes sense. But I would say one thing that we're focusing on is helping people really quickly be able to connect with the problem and see how it relates to their business. And so in terms of scaling, I think it's just finding the right industries and niches and then being able to, case studies, selling with case studies is always extremely powerful. So that's one way, is being able to get the proof from customers and have them be, do testimonials and things like that. That's one way. But then secondly, it's really being able to better understand kind of what the ICP is of our target market, and then being able to help them better understand what they need, why they need ScreenSteps, and how it's applicable to them.
So, of course, every journey in business has pain points or challenges along the way. Are there moments when you felt ScreenSteps is misunderstood, whether by prospects, investors, or even internally? And how do you overcome those perceptions?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially where we're where we're coining our own knowledge operations term, it's really, really fundamentally misunderstood. So one of the ways I think that we're combating this is being able to come up with a message that just speaks to problems that most managers understand. If you tell a manager, are you sick of answering questions? They're like, yes, I wish that I had more time to do my day-to-day tasks. Then absolutely, that's one way that we're able to solve that problem. But also, I think we're grouped in knowledge bases or learning management systems, which is just, those are two separate entities. And to lump us into either one of those is actually just shortchanging us. And so that's why we really like to be called knowledge operations, because it's so much more than that. It's more than just, here's some information, you should read it or learn it. Or here's where this information is stored. It's much more of like, all right, here's the foundational. Here's some videos on how you get trained up on something. And then here's the actionable. Every time you do a task, And we even do this, our CEO down to any person on our team does this. We turn to ScreenSteps and we just like look in our internal thing. Like I do this 50 times a day. How do I do this process? And I pull up a guide really quick and it shows me. And you'd think like that would slow you down. That would be your, one of the things that you'd guess, but it's really fascinating. If you actually use the guides, what we found is it makes you much quicker. And so I would say the main thing that we've been misunderstood is that we are just a knowledge base or we are just a learning management system. And we're so much more than that. And we're really changing the game in the way that people are onboarded, how they're trained, and like the speed to proficiency for employees, but also just like retention, member or customer service, and really changing the game in that way.
So if you had a magic wand or you could snap your fingers and could solve one persistent challenge today, something that just keeps resurfacing, what would it be and why does that matter so much to you?
Yeah. And are you meaning with ScreenSteps?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would really solve the problem of training and onboarding. That's the fundamental difference is how, because kind of like I said a little bit earlier, but to dive a little bit deeper into this is if I were to ask 90% of businesses how they train their employees, I would guess that it goes something like this. The person is hired, they sit through 3 or 4 days of onboarding, and then they're paired with someone in a like knee to knee or side by side training. And then it takes them quite a while to ramp up. And eventually, maybe within 6 months to a year, they're finally not having to ask questions. But ultimately, it takes them a really long time to get to where they need to be. And so the problem that I would solve if I had a magic wand is I would ask companies actually to just trust us in the way that if you actually, we're not saying you need to do zero training because there might be some foundational stuff. But instead, if you just stop asking people to memorize and have them just start relying on like information at their fingertips, it would actually solve so many business problems from, them having to look up where their HR information is to where they have to, how do I schedule my PTO? How do I open a new account for a customer? Anything really can be documented. And so I think that actually solves a lot of issues because each team a lot of times will operate in their own little system of, hey, I'm on Sarah's team, so I do it this way. Or, and you just get more of a systematic, organized way that businesses can operate in tandem and changes can be pushed out to a whole organization.
Well, really, as you mentioned before, it saves so much time on the manager's part, right? From having to answer all those questions. But I'm sure it really empowers the employees as well to feel as though they can look up this information themselves and get the work done much more efficiently than waiting for their manager to be available too.
Exactly. Yeah, no, you nailed that. And the other thing is I feel super passionate about like mentoring and helping people outside of work, that people aren't just employees that clock in and out, but that people have really great potential outside of work too. And so if you have the ability to help them, you're not just teaching them the click by clicks, but you can do some of that higher level mentoring and things like that with the extra time you have as a manager, then it really fundamentally changes the difference of like the way people feel about the workplace. It changes the culture of the workplace. And in a more of a remote work setting where you're not sitting next to each other, it works extremely well. It works, of course, in person, but it works extremely well for remote workers as well.
Yeah, those are really great points. So looking ahead, I'd love to hear just kind of what's on the future here for ScreenSteps. So when you think about the next 12 months, what are the top 2 or 3 key metrics that you're holding yourselves accountable to and that you're really looking for ScreenSteps for this next year?
Yeah, so we're excited to continue to serve those industries I talked about, especially I think we're making waves within credit unions and banks. I think we'll see more and more credit unions and banks that just see the need for ScreenSteps and the power that it has to transform their organization. And so one of the metrics I think is just continuing to serve credit unions and banks and to serve their members and customers. So that's one metric. And then just getting the word out to the masses. I mean, once I am able to talk about the problem, it's an exciting thing because it's not, of course, we serve credit unions and banks, but you can think of so many industries where it's like anyone that has employees and needs onboarded. So our hope is to get the word out about ScreenSteps to help people better understand how it can be used, and then continue. For me personally, I hope to partner with more amazing businesses to help them through partnerships as well. So seeing how ScreenSteps through a partnership could help and serve their customers and clients.
And how do you balance kind of those long-term visions with your short-term execution? And where are you personally placing your energy and attention over the next few quarters?
Yeah. This comes down to something I learned a long time ago, but I grew up in a household my dad was a machinist and he worked manual labor my whole life. And I remember that he would always have my brothers and sisters and I work on projects that were just like one step at a time. And so he would always say, you can accomplish any goal by breaking it down into fundamental little tiny steps. And while that seems so simple, it's so true. So I have just adopted that in my work life. I mean, I'm a stickler with having, voracious goals on what I want to accomplish, but then having daily tasks that keep me accountable to getting those goals. And so have you ever heard of the idea of bullet journaling? This is a little bit of a more personal thing, but it's really cool.
No, I haven't.
So, yeah, well, if you get a chance, you should look it up. But I'll just tell you kind of the idea is I like to take my goals and I like this principle called bullet journaling. Essentially, it's like, say I have one goal, and this could be a personal goal, it could be a fitness goal, a family goal, it could be a work goal, whatever it is. And you take that goal and you break it down into every single day. And it's not that you have to be perfect every single day. It's like, if I was to circle each day that I worked on that goal, over time, if I'm 70 to 80% proficient in that, I'm obviously going to get way better than if I just like stick to it for a little bit and let it drop off. And so that's a personal approach I take that I've learned from a friend, but also I apply that, to my business, to businesses or my business work. Because I think that we have to just break it down into little consumable parts and get better day by day and take those learnings and see, are we over the course of the quarter, are we getting 70, 80% accuracy on hitting those goals or not? So yeah, that's kind of my approach.
It's funny you mentioned that. I haven't ever heard of that, but I actually have implemented something like that. This last New Year's with my New Year's resolutions, I did that exact approach and it helped significantly to break it down into more consumable measurements, right? And to keep on track that way. So that makes sense to me. So one final question that I like to end with is an advice question. So what advice would you give to other leaders trying to scale and have success with a purpose-driven business like ScreenSteps while staying, resilient and adaptable in today's market?
Yeah. This is this is me personally. This is something I've learned, but I think everything in business is about connections. So I think I think not treating it transactional, but really having an interest in people that you're interacting with, if you're going to work in partnerships, having a genuine interest in the businesses that you're reaching out to and staying curious about what other businesses are doing and how there could be synergy between both. And so from a partnership standpoint, I think it's that. From more of an operations standpoint, I think it's learning from every single person that you work with. I really try to go by the mantra that every single person I interact with is a teacher for me. And if you go with that mindset, it helps you iterate on ways that the business should grow. Obviously, our CEO and our head of product, they're in charge of the business. They're the top dogs. But as an operations, I get to have a key hand in thinking about, where do we want to grow culturally? How can we help our employees have a better experience? And so one of the things that I think is just really valuing people. And when you value people, they value the business. And when the business is valued, then that spreads and emanates. And so I think just valuing people sets the standard for the business.
That's great advice. And for anyone who wants to learn more about ScreenSteps or connect with you, where is the best place?
Yeah, so you can connect with me on LinkedIn. And then my email is just Danielle@screensteps.com. I'd love to chat with anyone that's interested. And ScreenSteps.com also has more information as well.
Well, thank you everyone for tuning into Mo's Market Pulse. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave us a comment, and join us again to hear more insights from leaders coming up on future episodes. And thank you, Danielle, for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much.